I would offer, Kerri, that in my experience, the majority of the barriers are at a systems level and are outside of the locus of control of the individual educator. And so even that notion of bringing up fidelity does give that impression that the educator themselves is somehow withholding something. And it's just such an important nuance to the conversation to move it forward.
I don't want to terribly put you on the spot, but I love that call out that really often the conditions for teaching are set at the systems level. And so if there is an implementation challenge, it is likely a systems challenge. So would you be able to give us an example of a systems challenge that may impact a teacher's ability to implement with integrity?
I think the number one that I hear the most in my work is the schedule. So the teacher often does not set the school-wide schedule in any kind of way, but there is an expectation that their students spend a 90-minute reading block. I'm just making this up, but just as an example, a 90-minute reading block, 30 minutes must be spent on this program, 30 minutes must be spent on that program. Lunch happens at 10:15, PE happens here. When you put all of those pieces together, the time doesn't actually play out. So when we're thinking about the prescription, if there is quite literally not the time set aside in the day for the student to have the prescription, that's not at the teacher level. That's at a systems level in some way. It's the same thing in terms of like when you're implementing a program that happens to be on a computer and the teacher doesn't have the number of devices that are necessary. Like those, they seem so small and so kind of like duh, but that's the reality of classrooms each and every day is there's an expectation that I'm supposed to do X, but I don't even have the tools to do it, and you still want me to make it happen. That's that systems level work that's like, if your expectation is this, by God, you better ensure that the teacher has every single tool and you have paved the way for that to exist. And the reality is that very rarely happens.
Because we need for our systems leaders to think so much more deeply about what this transformation really means. It is not enough to acquire and execute on new stuff. We need to transform each system, each cog in the system, and then make sure that the system is running smoothly in order for that transformation to reach the classroom and every child in that classroom, for that momentum to sustain itself and for those gains to evidence themselves.
What is that?
Which is possible.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, what is that statistic that talks about, like, the number of decisions that a teacher makes in a day, right? It's like more than a emergency room physician or whatever that may be. But I think sometimes we lose sight of how a very small barrier multiplies in the classroom when you are dealing with so many mitigating factors. And so I feel like sometimes when listeners will hear me say, well, they don't even have enough computers, the answer is just put more computers in. Yes, but what does that take for the teacher to do that? Does she have to send an email to the district to that? You know what I mean? It's just like it gets compounded, these kinds of things that seem small, but actually at a systems level could be managed so much more than kind of laying the onus on the individual educator to solve that.
Right. The last time that you and I were in the room together in Boston and you delivered a keynote address, you all but received a standing ovation for one simple word, and that word was de-implementation. So if you are going to ask me to transform instruction and learn about the science of reading and its implementation in the classroom, which is known as structured literacy, what are you going to take off my plate? And so often the answer to teachers is nothing. We're taking nothing off your plate, but we're going to ask you to completely relearn how you taught reading and do everything differently, except for everything you've always done. So you're going to do that too. And then you said, no, actually, D, implementation, is every bit as much of an implementation plan as the acquisition of new stuff.